So I want to welcome Sarah tonight. Sarah Nichols is a recovering mechanical engineer, a library event planner and author who lives in Orlando, Florida, with a 60-pound mutt who thinks he's a Chihuahua and a gray fluffy cat who thinks she's a dog. Sarah writes YA as Sarah Nichols and romance under the name Aria Kane. Published both traditionally and independently, Sarah has worked in the publishing industry as an editorial intern and an editorial assistant, a publicist, a publicity director, a cover artist, and an art director. So she's been a very, very busy person. Sarah is the current board treasurer of and agent liaison for Pitch Wars and host of Pub Talk Live, contributor for Book Riot, and is represented by Rebecca Podos of Rees Literary Agency. And you can find Sarah's book information and information about her podcasts on our meetup page if you want to check her out in all the different mediums. And I will let Sarah get started. Welcome, Sarah.
All right. Hi. Hello, everyone. We've been chatting for a while, so I'm just going to go ahead and dive right in. So you got a lot of it there, but I'll just cover, because people are always like, how did you learn these things? So this is how I learned these things. I published with Sarah Nicholas and Aria Kane. Aria Kane is kind of on the back burner right now, though. So, and I was a book publicist and publicity director for several years for Entangled Publishing. I'm currently a library event planner. I plan author events and writing workshops for the Orlando area library for all 16 branches. And I am a contributor for Book Riot, which is, they teach us to say this, so please forgive me, the largest independent book news website in North America. And then I'm also the agent liaison and on the board for Pitch Wars, and Pitch Wars also runs PitMad. Let me know, just kind of like with a thumbs up if you've heard of Pitch Wars, thumbs up down if you haven't. Cool, okay. So it seems like most of you have, but so I'll just do a real quick summary of it. So Pitch Wars is just an annual mentoring event that's run by volunteers where established authors mentor one author by doing like a full revision of their manuscript and then preparing them for the agent showcase. So they revise for about 3 months, and then there's an agent showcase at the end of it. I knew I should not have had soda before this. I'm sorry, I'm gonna be a little burpy. And then PitMad is a quarterly Twitter pitching event, and there are different things, people get them confused. But the easiest way to remember is Pitch Wars is not social media based and PitMad is entirely on Twitter. I was also a former book blogger. I ran a book review site called Sift Book Reviews, which reviewed only self-published science fiction and fantasy books about 8 years ago now. And I'm the host of Pub Talk Live and Agent Chat Live, which are 2 shows on YouTube. Pub Talk Live is a publishing talk show that airs the 2nd and 4th Saturday of every month. And then Agent Chat Live is where I chat with agents kind of to get, so writers can get a better idea of like their personality and their working style and that kind of thing. So you can find all of those on my YouTube. All right, we're gonna start with elevator pitches today. We're gonna cover 2 different kinds of pitching. One is elevator pitches, which is also kind of what you would use when pitching to an agent at a conference. And then we're gonna cover book blurbs, which if you're a self-published author, it's your back cover copy. And if you are seeking traditional publishing, it's your query letter. They're essentially the same thing. There are going to be slight differences between the two, but not much. Elevator pitch. What is an elevator pitch? Imagine you're in an elevator with a potential agent, editor, or reader, and they ask, so what's your book about? And you have to finish by the time that they reach their floor. So you want to keep it to 30 to 60 seconds, which is about 50 to 75 words, depending on how fast you speak. For me, that's probably about 90 words, which is a good time to tell y'all that I speak fast. And if you want me to slow down, feel free to let me know, because I remember sometimes, and then sometimes I forget and I just go. And And you should have it ready to go at any second. We're going to talk about some strategies about how to have that. And the sole purpose, and I think this is where a lot of people get really tripped up on elevator pitches, is the sole purpose is to make the listener want to hear more. That's it. You don't have to try to close the deal then or there. You don't have to fit everything that's interesting about your book into your elevator pitch. All you want to do is get them to ask for more information. So you're going to want to focus on your story, usually not your themes, emotional journey, or background info, especially not background info. There may be times when you focusing on the theme or emotional journey might be beneficial to you, but those are pretty rare instances. So elevator pitch should sound natural, not as though you've memorized a pitch that you've written, which is essentially what you've done, but you want to try to make it sound natural, like you're talking, like you're a real person speaking to another real person. And you want to include the genre and the exciting bits. And so these exciting bits are conflict and stakes. So the questions I always like to ask that you might hear several times throughout this presentation, because I think a great way for targeting your pitch is, who's my main character? What do they want? And what stands in the way of getting what they want? And I'm pretty sure those questions are on the slide later. So if you want to take a picture of the slide out, when we get to there, you can. And genre, a lot of people forget to include the genre in their elevator pitch, and that can be a problem when the agent or the editor, whoever you're pitching to, doesn't have any context for your pitch. Sometimes it's clear in the pitch and sometimes it's not. It should be compelling and intriguing, absolutely no cliches. So when you use these cliche phrases, and I have examples later on, and you're just using a 50 to 70 word pitch, and your cliche is maybe 5 to 10 words, then your pitch is 10 to 20% cliche, right? So just think of it that way. And you don't want people to think that your book is 10 to 20% cliche, right? So show what makes it different, but don't tell what makes it different. And the difference between that is, you can show what makes something different. We're going to have some examples in a minute. But if you tell people something like, oh, this is really exciting, or it's fast paced, or something like that, that's when you're telling someone what the book is, rather than demonstrating by your pitch. Also be passionate. If you don't seem to care about your book, then there's not really much reason for anyone else to. I've helped at conferences and stuff. I do pitch critiques all the time, and a lot of times someone will come in there and they're like mumbling, and they're like, well, this book probably isn't that good, but blah blah blah. Like, don't do that. You want to make it sound as exciting as possible, because that's the only way that someone else is going to care about it. Because if you don't care about it, then why would anyone else? You can finish with a concluding call to action. And this is tricky because it depends on the situation, right? So if it's just like someone randomly at a conference, an agent or editor at a conference, asks you what your book is about, you can say at the end something like, the novel's finished and I have sample chapters available. If you're at a pitch session, say something like that. You don't at this point have to ask them if they want to see more, because if they do, they will tell you. But you also don't want to, like, if you're just talking to someone casually in a social situation, you don't want to make them feel put on the spot. If you're pitching to like a reader or something, what I like to do is, once I finish with my short elevator pitch, I'll say something like, do you like to read young adult, or do you like to read urban fantasy, or that kind of thing. If it seems like the person is like not interested at all, sometimes I'll ask a question that allows them to pivot away. So I'll say something like, what do you like to read? And then that way it can be either they're interested, they like to read the kind of book that mine is, or there's not, and then we have a conversation about books, and either way it's a win for me. All right, so some tips for elevator pitch. Ask yourself, oh, there's the questions. Who is your protagonist? Oh, this is a different way of saying it, but I alternate these two versions of these three questions. Who is the protagonist? What choice do they face? And what are the consequences of that choice? That's another way to get your stakes, your conflict and stakes in there. Don't discount yourself. I mentioned this earlier, but sometimes someone will say something like, oh, I know the market's not really right for this before they give their pitch. You don't want to start with a negative. Anyone who's taken a sales class can tell you that. Never get the other person in the mindset that they don't want your book or it's not that good or anything like that. Also consider comp titles if they work for your book. If you have racked your brain and you cannot think of any comp titles, it's not necessary. It does help sometimes, a lot, but they're not entirely necessary. So don't feel like you have to have them. Except I will say there are some agents now who use submittable or a submission form system, and they will ask for comp titles on the submission form. So just an FYI, at some point you might have to have them if you submit to those agents. One of my favorite comp titles I've ever seen, Scorched by Mary Mancusi. It's a young adult YA book about time traveling dragons. And she says this all the time. I'm on panels with her a lot. She says, my series Scorched is Terminator, but with dragons. And just by saying that, you know exactly what you're getting in for, right? Like, you know the tone of this world, you know the stakes, you know if there's going to be time travel involved. So I really like that. And we can talk about comp titles if you'll have questions about them at the end. You want to avoid cliches, and here's some of the cliches that I see most often in pitches. So-and-so is just an ordinary normal girl. Sounds boring. It's a boring way to start a pitch. Now, what you can do is you can be more specific. You can say, and of course this is also a cliche, but so-and-so was a farm boy, blah, 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 right? Or in contemporary YA, one of my favorite things to see is like something related to their hobby that also makes them seem normal. So you could say like, Madison was a band geek from small town in Texas, that kind of thing. So that shows you that she's an ordinary girl, but it doesn't say ordinary girl, which sounds normal. I mean, boring. So-and-so will never be the same, or the world will never be the same, things like that. These are very, very vague stakes, right? And so if you can clarify those stakes, if you can get them more specific, that's going to make your pitch more exciting. More than he bargained for. So-and-so got more than he bargained for, more than he signed up for. And again, it's just too vague, it's too general. And so find a more specific way of saying that. They're going to go on an incredible journey. Again, just vague, unclear exactly what's going on in the story. Falls into the wrong hands. You see this one a lot, especially when it comes to object-based, like science fiction or fantasy stories, where there's some kind of magical object or technology or whatever. Say the wrong hands. Like, if it falls into the hands of an evil emperor, if it falls into the hands of, a scientist with no morals or something like that, that's more specific. It's gonna be more exciting. To make matters worse, this is another one. This is just kind of like one of those filler phrases. And so remember, you're trying to keep your pitch as short as possible. So you want to keep out any filler phrases that you have. And that's definitely a filler phrase. Will change everything. Again, same as will never be the same. Just be a little more specific about what is going to change. Like, if your definition of will change everything means the sky is going to be pink instead of blue forever, like, that's not that exciting, right? Whereas if your will change everything means that everyone is going to die the day they turn 18, like, that's a different situation, right? So just be more specific. This is the thing that happens common in women's fiction particularly. The phrase face for past will appear in almost every women's fiction pitch that anyone has ever written. And so again, this is another situation where just be more specific, and more specificity is exciting. That's the thing to remember. All right, so here are some short pitches that I wanted to go over. This is for my book, and so sometimes when you're developing an elevator pitch, you're going to develop pitches for different audiences, right? So the way that I pitch this book to a teenager, for example, is going to be different than the way I pitch this book to a journalist or a librarian or, you know, someone like that. So this is the pitch that I would use when I'm speaking to a teenager usually. Dragons are people too. I always pause because I let that title sink in because people always laugh at it. I didn't come up with that title, so I can't take any credit for it. But Dragons Are People Too is about Kitty, a 16-year-old Chinese dragon shapeshifter who works for the US's Draconic Intelligence Command, or as she likes to call it, Dick. And one day her race is exposed to the public and the dragons are taken into custody except for her and her partner Sonny. Then everything goes to hell. And so this, if you read this book, it's got a kind of sarcastic POV, and so the pitch is intended to mirror the voice of the main character. And so that's why you see some things that I wouldn't use in a book that didn't have that voice, such as her liking to call it Dick, and everything going to hell, because that's just written in the main character's voice. So here's my second book, Keeping Her Secret. And so the first pitch is something that I would use when pitching to like bloggers or that kind of thing. Keeping Her Secret is a light-hearted summer camp romance between two very different, sorry, my pictures are covering my words. Okay, two very different girls who declare a prank war rather than face their feelings for each other. It's very simple. And then if I need to be even quicker, usually if I'm introducing myself like on a panel at a conference or something like that, I'll say Keeping Your Secret is an LGBT summer camp romance with pranks and angst. And it rhymes. It's a great way to end an intro. And these are very short ones, right? Because these books are already published, so I'm not convincing an agent or editor to invest their time in it. What I'm doing with these is I'm trying to convince either a blogger or a reader to read it. This is one from my friend Ella Martin, and this one takes a little bit different of a take. It's a contemporary young adult continuation of Snow White after she rides off with Prince Charming, only to learn he's not so charming after all. So this is The Frost King by Ellie Blake, who was my Pitch Wars mentee in 2014, sorry. And it came out in January 2017 from Little Brown and debuted on the New York Times bestseller list. And so we had kind of these are two different pitches, but you can also use them in combination with each other. So what I like to do is I like to start with a very, very short pitch, something I can say in one sentence, something I can say in 10 seconds or 15 seconds. And then I try to gauge my audience's reaction. And if they seem interested, then I'll have a secondary pitch to follow up, right? I'll have something with a little more detail. And so that's what is happening here. But you could also use each of these pieces individually. So the Frostwood series follows a 17-year-old girl who has to hide her powers from the ruling class. Also, that's kind of generic and boring, but it tells you exactly kind of like what genre it's in, right? And so then we get more specific in the second one. Ruby is one of the last Firebloods in a land ruled by frost. To save the kingdom from an ancient curse, she must ally with her enemies, control the fire within her, and sacrifice the boy she loves. So that's a lot more specific, right? That gives us conflict, that gives us stakes. What's going to happen if the main character doesn't succeed in what they're trying to do. All right, so how to craft a perfect elevator pitch. This is like a process I like to go through. So you want to start by writing it down. If that's the way your brain works, I think most writers do well with writing things down. But write it about 10 to 20 different ways from different angles. Sometimes when I'm coaching people on developing their pitches, I'll have them try to write 5 pitches that sound like they're for different books, that are focusing on one specific exciting detail in the book or one specific, exciting trope or something like that. And then, so record yourself speaking each one. And a lot of people don't like the way their voice sounds. That's fine. Like, just kind of cringe and get through it. But then take a break and then listen to your recording and see what works and what doesn't. And you might find that you really like a specific phrase from your first pitch, and you really like a different phrase from your third pitch, and then you really like the way you describe the character in the fourth pitch you wrote. So you can piece those together for the best parts and rewrite. I call it a Frankenstein. Sometimes I'm like, Frankenstein your pitch. You want to aim for 3 to 5 pitches at this point, and you can record again, take a break, revise again, and prepare 3 pitches for 3 different audiences or situations. So if you're thinking about pitching to an agent, you're going to want to kind of focus or target a pitch towards something that an agent is going to want. Whereas if you're trying to pitch to like 12-year-olds versus like a 40-year-old librarian versus like a 30-year-old blogger, those are kind of going to be different pitches, right? Different styles. And then you're going to want to practice. Practice on everyone. Practice on your family, practice on your friends, practice, talking to your pets, talking in the mirror. Another good thing to do at this point is to give your friend an elevator pitch who has never read your book, and then ask them to repeat back to you what the book is about. And if you feel like they got it, that they know the core of your story, then your elevator pitch is probably pretty good. If your friend is unsure, or if they stumble, or if what they repeat back to you doesn't sound that exciting, then you may still have some work to do. But get to know it without thinking. That way you can say it almost muscle memory. So if someone asks you what your book is about, what is your book about? I like me saying that Keeping a Secret is a summer camp romance with pranks and inks. Like that literally, as soon as I start saying Keeping Her Secret is, like the phrase just comes out of my mouth because I've said it so many times that I just know how to say it without even thinking about it. Especially if you're going to like, well, whenever we can all do this, if you're going to cons and that kind of thing, you're going to want to have it ready to go out, because what happens is sometimes people say, what's your book about? And the author's like, well, it's about this girl and she, she has problems, and like, no one's interested in that. At that point, you've already lost your audience, right? So make sure you have it just ready to go, and that way you won't lose any audience because you don't know what you're talking about. I will say, by the way, I developed this workshop about 5 or 6 years ago, after I asked the guy what his book was about. And 30 minutes later, no lie, I knew his entire life story. I knew his son's entire life story, and I still did not know what this book was about. And so I was like, oh. So that's when I developed this workshop. So, all right, any questions on elevator pitches before we go on to the longer blurb? I'm trying to find the chat again. Oh, I'm not in the right window. There we go. Okay, it doesn't look like any questions. I'll give you a second. Hello.
Yeah, you mentioned comp title. Is that comparable or comparison title?
Yes, thanks for asking. I'm sorry. I talk so much about
jargon there. I didn't quite.
I know. I talk so much about comp titles, I forget. Yeah, so it's comparative title. Amazon calls them also bots. But it's like, if you read this book, you would like this book, or it should fit next to this book on the shelf, or something like that. Readers of a comp title would also enjoy your book, basically.
Would it be like an inspiration for your book?
It could be an inspiration, but like, what do you mean inspiration? Like, how would you?
Well, you might have. I like Hemingway, so I saw a Hemingway book and say, hey, there's some good points there. I could do better than Hemingway, so I can write something nice, something like that.
Yeah, well, you can. So here's another way to do comp titles. Someone was asking if comp titles should be in your genre. They most often are, but sometimes they are not. And sometimes what you can do is you can pull elements from it. So you can say something like, this book not demonstrates, what's the word? Explores the themes from Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea but with a modern twist or something like that. So you could
That's
say
good.
something
Yeah.
like that. And as far as your genre, sometimes you can use a really effective comp title that's not in your genre. So for example, a lot of times, some of my favorite comp titles are, this is XYZ but in space, right? So you're thinking, so there's an Earthbound story, and then they're like, this is this story but in space. So you could be like, this is, you know, The Office, but taking place on a spaceship. Something like that. So you can go outside your genre if you have kind of that twist on it.
Okay.
Could they be fiction, but your story could be memoir? You could do that. You could say, it's a real life XYZ. It's a real life, I can't think of any stories right now that would make a great memoir because my brain's not there, but I'm trying to think. Oh yeah, so you could say, this is a real life Crazy Rich Asians, for example. All right, any other questions about short pitches before we move on to the longer pitches? All right, cool, so I'm gonna go on. Yeah, so we're gonna talk about book blurbs now. And I say book blurb because this, oops, sorry. This could either be a cover query letter for an agent, or you can also use these tips to develop back cover copy if you're self-publishing. And you're gonna wanna introduce a couple of things. Premise, which is just like the general concept of your book, right? Excuse me. 1 or 2 characters, maybe 3. I would not go over 3 characters unless you introduce them in an ensemble type of way where you're like, you know, like a paladin, a bard, a whatever, a wizard, go on, blah, blah, blah. But usually you're gonna wanna try to stick to 1 or 2 characters, and it's the character that is the core of your story. It's the character that if you pull them out of the story, none of the rest of it would make sense. And then what happens, which I know seems obvious, but I've read a lot of these that never actually say what happens in the book. And just in a general sense, like kind of usually only saying what happens in the first like quarter to third of the book, and then teasing what happens in the rest. But a lot of times you'll see a blurb that's just like all world building, and there's no character and there's no plot hinted at in the blurb. And then conflict and stakes, and you're probably going to hear me say those words a lot during this. And remember, the goal is pretty much the same as the elevator pitch. The whole goal of a query letter is to convince the agent, editor, reader, whoever, to read your book. Read the first page of your book, I guess I should say. Like every part in the pitching process is just trying to get your audience to read the next part in the process. And so a query letter or a book blurb doesn't have to have every single piece of your story in it. So here are some tips for making an enticing summary. Make the tone, the world, the plot, and the main characters known. And this can be really complicated, especially if you have complicated world building. And you're going to want to try to put as little as possible of world building in your pitch, that the person can understand what's going on, but not be overwhelmed by it. Okay, conflict, stakes. I'm just gonna get like a button one day that says conflict, stakes. So again, conflict is what stands in your main character's way, and stakes are what happens if they don't succeed. What are the consequences if they don't do what they need to do? Should be, again, specific and unique. It doesn't have to be quite as specific as a short pitch. You might be able to use a cliched phrase here or there if you can't find anything better for it. But you don't want to use too many cliches. You want to be as specific as possible. And you also want it to be concise. We were talking about query letters the other day on a Pitch Wars chat, and it sounds like a riddle where someone's trying to trick you, because someone will always ask, how long should a query letter be? And the answer is as short as it can be. Because I was actually just talking to a literary agent today on the phone, and she was talking about they're getting so many pitches right now. Some of them are getting hundreds a day. And so if you think, this agent is getting hundreds of pitches and is trying to read through hundreds of pitches, and they roll over to your query letter and it's 3 pages long, like they're not going to be very happy with you. So try to be as concise as possible while also, being enticing. A really great way to kind of see how these should be written is to read back cover copy for books in your genre and take notes on what works. Now you can go to Amazon and you can just read, the descriptions on Amazon of books that you think your book would fit next to on the shelf, and see what they do and what works. If you read a line that you really like, or if you read a blurb that really grabs you, like pick it apart, like take it apart and, analyze it with a microscope. I saw there was a chat message. Any idea why agents are getting hundreds of pitches right now? I will say by right now, I mean like the last couple of years. Just because this agent has been an agent for over 30 years. And so she was kind of talking about the way the industry has changed. And so when she started, she would get 10 pitches a week because people had to write the letters and mail them in and do research via books. And it was a lot harder to find information about agents back then. And was a lot harder to pitch agents back then. And so a lot of it is just because it's much easier to do now. It's much easier to find the information. It's much easier to, what was that noise? I don't know what just happened. My computer made a noise. I should make sure. I'm just going to switch over real quick to make sure my battery's not dying or something. Okay. Oh, Zoom. Sorry, Al. Okay. Oh yeah, so why are they getting so many pitches? And then also I think there have been a lot of people laid off. There have been a lot of people working from home or furloughed or that kind of thing. And so I feel like even though there are some people who are unable to create right now, there are also a lot of people with a lot of time on their hands, and they're finally getting around to sending the queries that they've been wanting to send for a while. All right. So here are some do's and don'ts of pitching the query letter. State the stakes. So again, stakes is what happens if your main character doesn't get what they need. But don't give away the ending of your book. That is something that you do in the synopsis, which is a whole other monster. But I know it can be confusing because sometimes, especially older school people, will use the word synopsis for the book blurb, what we've been talking about today. So if someone uses the phrase synopsis, just make sure to clarify which document they mean, because a synopsis, the only way that I'll use it is to describe the document that tells you everything that happens in a book. And that is, you do give away the ending in that. So I'm sure it causes a lot of confusion because sometimes people will use those phrases interchangeably. Do sell your book by making it sound exciting, by making it sound like something someone will want to buy, but don't editorialize your book. And so editorialize means including phrases that would appear in a review. So something like Sarah Nicolas has written, I should probably come up with this phrase. Like Sarah Nicolas has written the quintessential teen coming of age story, something like that. That would be editorializing, and you don't want to do that in your query. Do match the book's writing style in terms of tone and voice. But the query and back cover copy, except in very rare instances, should be written only in third person present. Even if the book is written in first person past, the query letter should still be written in third person present. Definitely do not write your query letter in first person. When you're reading it's very confusing when a book comes through, a query comes through in first person. because it takes you several seconds to figure out if the person is talking about themselves, the writer, or if it's a character speaking. And it is especially unsettling when your main character is a serial killer. Ask me how I know that. Yeah. So just write your query letter in third person present. Do raise questions. Like, basically you want to phrase your query in a way that causes the reader to ask themselves a question. Like, what happens? Like, why did she wake up in a puddle of blood? You know, that kind of thing. But don't actually write those questions down. Don't use rhetorical questions in your query letter. Agents tend to have like a reflex against a rhetorical question. So even though your rhetorical question might not be that bad, like, just because it's a rhetorical question, an agent is going to have like a bad reaction to it. And the reason why is because sometimes the answer to your rhetorical question is I don't care or no. So a lot of times the rhetorical questions will be like, have you ever wondered what it's like to XYZ? And if the agent says no, you're literally starting with them with a no in their brain first off, and anyone who's ever taken a sales class can tell you like that's a big no-no, right? Let's see, what are these questions? Oh my gosh, you paid an editor to help with a query letter and she began with a rhetorical question? Yeah, that's, I'm sorry. That's probably not a good sign. I'm not saying it's 100% for sure bad, but it's probably not a good sign. We can talk, Gail, if you want. I don't have a whole lot of time this month, but if you can wait about 2 weeks, if you want to email me, I might be able to at least give you like a high level feedback. I may not be able to do like a full critique, but.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah. How does a nervous mother end up at the Ivy League? Yeah, it's still, yeah, rhetorical questions are still kind of, because you're like, how does a nervous mother end up at the Ivy League? I feel like Ivy League is full of nervous mothers, so that doesn't really seem compelling to me. You see, this is the kind of thing that can happen with a rhetorical question, is the answer can be like, I don't care, which is not going to happen with statements. You also don't want to introduce too many characters. It can be confusing to keep track of multiple characters in such a short pitch. And you also don't want to introduce too many unfamiliar concepts. This is especially a problem if you're in science fiction, fantasy, or any kind of like speculative genre. And so example I like to use is, I can't remember what book it was, but I read, the pitch for it, and the main character uses a small time travel device, and it has a fancy name that they use in the world of the book, right? But in the pitch, it's just called time travel device. Because it's a short phrase, you know exactly what it means. Whereas if they said this fancy name of it, instead of saying time travel device, I wouldn't know what that means, and it wouldn't make sense. It would take me a couple minutes to like kind of parse that out. So, yeah. How do I pitch a memoir? So I will say, when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about long form fiction, and so memoir is going to be slightly different. How do I summarize a memoir in third person? Yeah, so in memoir, it's going to be slightly different. It is usually pitched in first person because you are also the character. Yeah, so you're usually going to pitch memoir in first person, but pitching memoir is actually not that much different from pitching fiction. Because a lot of people read memoir like fiction. A lot of people read it for that like narrative hook, What's on the next slide? Okay, let me make sure. Okay, so I have a couple query letter examples, and actually let's go. Okay, so this is the blurb that my publisher wrote for my book based on the summary that I wrote for them. All's fair in love and summertime prank wars. That's the tagline that they came up with. The last person Rhea Johnson expected to run into at her new summer camp is Courtney Chastain, her childhood best friend and the girl who broke her heart after a secret, mind-blowing, life-altering kiss. So we introduced the two main characters right there. We introduced conflict in the first sentence. She definitely didn't expect to be sharing a bunk bed with her for 4 long weeks. So we're raising the conflict there. Courtney has what every girl wants. She's beautiful, rich, and the object of every boy's desire at Camp Pine Ridge. Too bad none of them make her feel an iota of what Rhea's kiss did all those years ago. But Courtney needs to uphold appearances at all costs, even if it means instigating an all-out prank war with Rhea as her main target. Neither girl can stop thinking about the other, but that doesn't mean they can give up past hurts and take a chance on a future together. So we introduced the two main characters. We raised the conflict. We introduced an internal conflict for Courtney. And then we hint at the stakes at the end, right? I'm going to pull up the chat to see what they're saying. If you have 3 narrative formats, you pick one character. It kind of depends. I wouldn't give you a one answer fits all or one thing fits all answer for this. But usually focusing on one character's journey is probably going to be the best bet for you in a query letter. Sometimes if you're able to summarize the 3 main characters, kind of introduce them and summarize their conflict in 1 or 2 sentences each, then you can be able to do it. And so it kind of depends on like how complicated the conflict between them are as well. So it depends is my answer. Sorry. All right. Let's go to, okay. So this is the query for the Frost King, which was the original title of this book. 17-year-old Ruby hid her fireblood powers until the day Frostblood soldiers raided her village. In the Frost King's prison, she vows to kill the king who ordered her mother's death. So right there we have kind of her motivation. One night, 2 Frostbloods, a crippled monk and a scarred young man, sneak into the prison and offer her a deal, her freedom in exchange for an alliance against the king. The 3 travel to a secluded mountain abbey where she learns to harness her powers and struggles against her growing fascination with Arcus, the warrior who trains her. Before she completes her training, Frostblood soldiers capture Ruby and take her to the castle where she's forced to fight gladiator-style matches for the king's entertainment. Meanwhile, watching for a chance to destroy the cursed throne that imbues the king with power. When Ruby discovers that Argus is the rightful king and the curse starts to control him, he must make a choice. Save him, but unleash a terrible darkness on the kingdom, or end the curse by killing the man she loves. And so here we introduce the character, we introduce her initial motivation, her initial conflict, and then we change her conflict when she's rescued and she's being trained. And then so I mentioned about like not introducing too many unfamiliar characters. So this is a way that you can introduce characters that are important to the narrative without naming them. So we have here a crippled monk and a scarred young man. And so those are 2, this is like very hero's journey. I don't know if y'all are familiar with hero's journey, but the monk is the mentor figure, you know, and then the scarred young man is also Arcus. And we decided to phrase the query letter this way because it's not important to you. It's not important right away that you know that the scarred young man is Arcus when you're reading this query. And to do that would take up too much space and it would be like awkward to make sure that you know that those are the same person. And so that's what I'm saying when I say that you don't have to include every single thing in your query. That was something that we took out, and reading it doesn't make much difference to the reader, that they don't know that that's the same person. Does that make sense? Okay, let me see. I think I have Oh no, okay. Oh, oops, I didn't mean to stop sharing. Sorry, y'all. um, okay, let me get that back up here. Oh, I gotta hit another button. There we go. All right, so let me get back to where we were. Oh, this is what I was looking for. Oh, I didn't realize I'd skipped it. Okay, so this is the query letter for Hollywood Homicide by Kelly Garrett, who's one of my good friends. She's a mystery writer, and her book Hollywood Homicide has won almost every award in the mystery world. So she's won the Anthony and the, oh my gosh, I just forgot what it was. The Edgar, no, not the Edgar. Edgar's for, I don't remember. I'm not that familiar with the mystery world, sorry. But she has won the Lefty, the Ippy, like almost every mystery award for this, her debut novel, which is this book. Dania Anderson, a semi-famous, mega-broke Black Hollywood actress, doesn't set out to solve a murder. But when she drives past the hit and run of aspiring actress Haley Joseph and the LAPD offers a $15,000 reward, she figures she has two choices: get the reward or become a stripper. And she doesn't possess the inner thigh strength needed to properly work a pole. Dana's pretty sure she saw the vehicle. The problem is she can't remember what the dang car looks like. Not that she's willing to let a little thing like that stand between her and 15 grand. What starts as simply trying to remember a speeding car soon blossoms into a full-out investigation. Dania even recruits her friends, including her longtime crush turned Hollywood it boy. They haven't spoken since a slight misunderstanding involving his hand and her non-stripper worthy thigh. Her friends aren't even allowed to mutter his name. He's like Voldemort, except with a nose. When Dania uncovers a link between the accident and an even bigger Hollywood crime spree, she enacts her own version of Law and Order Hollywood at paparazzi hotspots, celeb homes, and movie premieres. She loves every second of her growing investigation until someone tries to kill her. And there are no second takes in real life. Dania may be dead broke, but it sure beats being just plain dead. And what I like about this query is it infuses a lot of voice. You can tell by reading this query what the voice of the book is going to sound like, what it's going to sound like when you read it, right? And I also like this first sentence. Dania Anderson, a semi-famous broke Black Hollywood actress, doesn't set out to solve a murder. And so this is a pretty standard thing in kind of the cozy genre. Some people would call this book cozy, and some people would call it kind of like just light or amateur detective. And so it sets that up right away. Like, she's not a detective. She's basically a failed actress, right? And so it doesn't say, you notice, that Dania Anderson is not a detective. It tells us what she is instead. And so that's an example of a specificity at the very beginning of the query letter. All right, I think that's all the query letter examples that I have for you today. Do we have questions? I'm happy to take questions. If y'all want me to talk about what makes a good comp title, just let me know. I can talk about that for about 5 minutes. No questions?